Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming on. We hope that you have enjoyed your day so far. We are so privileged and delighted for you to watch us uh, tonight. And as you continue to support the ministry, as we continue to have these difficult conversations, but necessary conversations about the things that are going on in the world, we want to thank everybody again for tuning in. And as we talk about again, from pandemic to pandemonium, as we talk about the state of what's going on in our country as well as in the whole entire world, try to bring some biblical perspective, sociological perspective, spiritual, what does God have to say, business, all those things we want to discuss tonight. Please do us a favor and share as much as possible. Let people know that we are on tonight, Periscope, YouTube, Facebook, whatever platform you're on. Again, please do us a favor and share with somebody. And while you're sharing, we are doing part two tonight of Pandemic to Pandemonium. If you missed part one, that was back in June during the Power of God conference. The video is on our website, on YouTube, as well as on Facebook. You can visit at BBC of NJ, as well as you can visit David G. Evans 1 and watch the first part of From Pandemic to Pandemonium as we talked about a wide array of topics. Bishop Evans was on that, Bishop Sharona, Dr. Jamal Bryant, Bishop Joseph Walker, Dr. Antipas Harris, who's back with us again. Bishop David Maldonado was with us. Great conversation. And we're picking it up with a different group of individuals, as well as Dr. Harris and Bishop again, as we talk about this important topic, because every single month it's something news coming out from the coronavirus to the civil unrest, social injustice, all those things we need to talk about and have a conversation about. And we're so glad you guys can tune in today, just bantering a little bit. Please do us a favor and share as much as possible. And as people are coming on, we'll do some introductions, and we'll start up top, of course, with the visionary of this great discussion, Bishop David G. Evans. Hey, Bishop.
Hello, how are you?
Good, good. Y'all know him already, of course. And also we have Dr. Winfred Sanders on. Dr. Sanders, can you introduce yourself, your church name, where you're from?
Sure. Pastor of Grace Baptist Church in West Hampton, New Jersey. I live in Mount Laurel. Been a friend of the Bethany ministry for a number of years.
Good, good. And also Dr. Antipas Harris, Potter's House, Dallas, Texas.
Hi, I'm Antipas Harris. It's a delight to be here. Thank you, Bishop Evans, for the opportunity. Thank you all so much for including me in the conversation. I'm a social pastor at the Potter's House in Dallas, Texas, and president of Jake's Divinity School.
Good. And also Mr. Greg Montonaro.
Greg Montonaro. I am a vice president at Drexel University. I've been involved in a lot of nonprofits. I'm on the board of Goodwill Industries, past board chair there. Also involved in a lot of other nonprofits, including I helped start a faith-based full scholarship school in North Philadelphia.
Good, good. And of course, no stranger to the nation, Dr. Rita Twiggs. Dr. Twiggs.
Yes, I'm still trying to switch off, and can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, let me close down the other one.
Oops. Oops. There you go.
You're back.
Yeah. Yes.
Can't
Close down and
hear her now.
okay.
We'll remove her and get her fixed in a minute.
Okay. Rita must be in Bahrain or something.
Yeah. So what we'll do, we can start the conversation. Bishop, we did Pandemonium Part 1 last month in June.
Mm-hmm.
It is about a month later. And from your standpoint, I know a month isn't a lot of time to make significant change, but what have you seen different, if anything's different, in this past month?
Well, I think there has been a tremendous shift, tremendous difference, if we can even call it that. I think there's been a progression of every circumstance that we've been concerned with in the context of socially, culturally, spiritually. I think there's been a progression. I think those progressions have been appropriate for what we've been seeing. The true identity of things are being revealed. We've watched the lack of appropriate response to the COVID virus here in the United States, as we are sending a message to the world that we're more concerned with bucks rather than bodies. We've watched the civil unrest become a reality, and what has surprised me is how the effort has been sustained. How it's not just been a 24, 48-hour effort, but it's being sustained. It's nationwide. And it's becoming personal for a lot of people. Just as an aside, one of my nephews was in New York protesting, and we couldn't find him for like 7 days.
Wow.
And come to find out that the kids that were in the protest in downtown Manhattan were actually camping out in Central Park. And so their phones had run out of power and blah, 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 blah. And they were staying in New York because the effort is going to be sustained. They're not giving up. They believe this is a time for great change. And for the church, I believe it also is a time for great revelation for us and a reawakening of our social interaction. The nation has proven that we've been on a journey, but we have not traveled very far. And equality is still an idea, a concept, and not a reality for a lot of people. So I'm just glad that these brains that are on here today, I think people are going to be amazingly impressed by the content of the experience and the know-how and the wisdom of the people we've invited on today. I'm really, really excited to hear what they have to say about the pandemic and also what it has produced and what we're calling pandemonium, or I think the proper cultural response at this time is the confusion that we think we're actually seeing, when what we're really witnessing is a shifting.
Right. That's good. Dr. Sanders, you want to chime in on your perspective of what's been going on in 2020
Sure.
from COVID as well as to the social injustice?
Sure. Well, I live in two worlds. One is the church world, and I also live in the world as a small entrepreneur business. And this pandemic is a global revelation, and it's not restricted to the U.S. It started in China, it moved into Europe, and then it came to the U.S. And I agree with Bishop Evans that it is revealing some things that have been systematically ignored in our system. Racism is one. It has exposed the lack of leadership at the top, both at the church level as well as at the government level and the social level. So I've always said that when there's chaos, there's always opportunity. And I think the opportunity for Black Lives Matter actually came to the forefront because they thought it was always about Black people, but I think it's a global pandemic. It's a global social issue, because when we started to march in the streets, we also saw the same issues in the UK that Black people are experiencing, Africans, we're experiencing in the US and other parts of the world. So I think that has been a very important revelation to me. The other one is that there's a phrase said you can't put new wine in an old vat, and this is where we are. We're trying to put new ideas and some old traditions, and what has happened is the wine vat is actually cracking because it can't hold the fermentation of these ideas, these concepts, and so all of this unrest is a release of stuff that has already been boiling beneath the surface for a long period of time. And what we did when we chose the new president Donald Trump, we were very myopic in our view, and we have to realize that we are in a global economy. We're in a global ministry, because with the live stream, the internet, we're able to broadcast to people that we never see, never hear, but they get to hear the message of God. So you can't be parochial. You have to have a vision that is broad enough to be inclusive of everyone. And the church really has to take a new position. And that position is, go ye therefore into the world and make disciples of everyone. And we have to have a global ministry and a global mentality. And what I've seen is that is being exposed, and we're seeing the weaknesses in the church, in the government, in our systems. And I think God is it's a revelation from God. Pandemics is something that the Bible used to make change. We call them pestilence, we call them plagues, but it was actually the will of God moving forward to say that we're going in the wrong direction. We need to make change.
Okay.
Hey, Win, can you add? Win doesn't wear this badge, but he's a scientist also. Can you add some insight as it relates to the pandemic that perhaps the everyday individual does not know about the pandemic and the progression of it and what needs to be done to bring it to under control?
Sure. I think in a very simplistic way, the COVID virus is a virus that has always existed. It's the common cold virus. But what has happened is it is now mutated into a different form. And when that happened, they did it in Wuhan, China. They were investigated. And I think what happened is there's a possibility there was some genetic engineering, that this virus is like no other virus we've ever seen before. Because most flu viruses, you get pains and headache. This actually attacks our respiratory system. And when it attacks your respiratory system, it behaves in a way that is very unusual. So we had no vaccines. The body is not familiar with this virus. So it's a new entity. And as a new entity, we don't have a defense system. We don't have the antibodies to be able to fight it off. So we have to build those antibodies. That's why they use plasma once you have been infected, because it has the antibodies in the plasma to help you to fight it off. And I think where we make a mistake is that a lot of people are asymptomatic with the disease and they feel very well. That means that asymptomatic means that you have the virus, you can infect other people, but you don't feel sick yourself. There's a possibility that the COVID virus may have been here since December, and we just didn't know it because we didn't recognize it. And it may be in a population that were asymptomatic. And now when it gets into the older generation and elderly people, it wreaks havoc because your immune system is not able to fight it off.
Okay. Thank you, Win.
Does that help? I mean, is that what you're...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So we have to treat it differently. We're going back to the things that we did with the Spanish flu, and it's the old way: you wear a mask, quarantine, because the only way you can stop it is you have to separate people from each other so you don't infect them until you can build up the immunity to the virus. The flu virus, when you start about H1N1, our bodies are familiar with that. So it's easy. You don't need a vaccine, and even the vaccine just helps to promote what you already have. But the COVID virus is one that is totally new to humans, moving from bats into humans. And there's another one coming. It's just a matter of time. So if we don't learn from this one, we'll face another one real soon.
That's good.
Okay.
So, Greg, if I can ask you a more of a targeted question, because I think you said you're at Drexel, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I know Harvard needs some changes to online only. A couple other schools are doing both. What are you seeing in the collegiate space as it relates to the virus? Let's start there first. If I can ask you that question, because I would love to hear how colleges are handling the situation.
It's a very challenging environment because obviously social distancing is nearly, well, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult. So of course in the spring, pretty much all the colleges and universities sent people home to do distance learning, and that worked, and everyone is cooperative. But as you come into the fall, you could ask people to do online learning, but for a lot of the population, I'm just speaking very bluntly here because I think that's what people are looking for in this conversation. It doesn't work for a lot of people. So if you think about whether it's a young person or people's kids, the freshman year experience isn't the freshman year experience online. The senior year experience isn't the senior experience online. If you're a college athlete and you're told, well, you can come back to school, but you can't play basketball, volleyball, be on the swim team, that's not your experience. And so what starts to happen is if you try to go back to school and be completely online, any number of your students just aren't going to show up. They're going to take the year off. So if you have a freshman class of 3,000, suddenly you're going to have 2,000 show up because 1,000 are going to say, you know what, I'm going to sit the year out and come back next year because it's not worth the money for me to show up and not get my experience. And then what happens is the financial model just doesn't work. You can't afford to open. So there's a lot of pressure on these schools to have to open. So I think you're seeing Harvard is saying, well, you know, we're going to be largely online. To be very direct about it, Harvard or even the University of Pennsylvania, they can afford to make decisions like that based on the size of their endowment and where they are. They can afford to do that. But the vast majority of colleges and universities can't afford to not open in person. Now, young people, and you see this in their behavior at places like the Jersey Shore right now, young people are not making the most responsible decisions around COVID-19. To some degree, they feel a little bit immune. And a lot of the concern is actually exposure to the faculty and staff when they come back, because they're making some irresponsible decisions. There's the asymptomatic transmission. There's all of that. And to get them to cooperate when they come back, and even if we do smaller classes, we do rotating classes, we do social distancing, they're still going to be in contact with older folks in campus in any form of a model. And it's to try to make something work. On the flip side, if we don't open in person, I don't know how these campuses actually survive. So this is the reality that we're confronting. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what we're looking at.
So, Greg, are you saying that this thing is also a threat to established education at the college level?
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, I think you're seeing most schools are saying that they're going to open. You know, like Temple said they're opening, and I think the reason that they're saying that is, well, they will tell you that they can do it, but I think that they have to do it because I don't think that the schools can afford not to open. Okay. They know that if they don't open in person, that there is enough of a number that won't show up, that their financial numbers just don't work. Okay. That they could in the spring, if they just said, okay, we're moving to online, the people already paid, they'll transition. But if you go to open up, everyone is thinking, well, you know, a year from now, there'll be a vaccine. Okay, I'll just sit out a year. And all of a sudden, you're losing 25, 30% of your student body. That it's called net tuition income. They'll lose too much of their financial model that they can't support it. Again, Harvard, Penn, legitimately, if they wanted to finance the entire program with no tuition income, they could do that. Any school that's tuition dependent, which is 95% of universities and colleges, they can't afford to lose a third of their tuition income. They just can't sustain that. And I don't see any federal or state bailout program for these schools. So they have to open the doors.
How many of the universities do you think have an endowment? If we look at the top universities in the country, Stanford's, the Harvards, the Yales, are they all endowed at a point where they could basically absorb this season, or are you saying that most universities are not in this position? They've got to open up because it's an economic drive above all others.
I mean, I'm ballparking it, but I'd say 95% have to open. I mean, you could list the ones that don't have to, but it's, you know, it's Penn, Princeton, Yale, Dartmouth, Stanford. You know, it's those highly endowed, multi-billion-dollar endowment institutions. But once you start getting beyond that, you know, forget it, because parents will just look at it and they'll just say, you know, why am I spending $50,000, $70,000 a year for an experience that's not the experience? They just won't do it.
Wow.
They'll say, we'll sit it out a year. We'll come back next year.
May I chime in?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we work with the University of California and UPenn in our business. At the University of California system, that's all of the major universities in California. One of the concerns is not just the tuition, But if you don't have people showing up on campus, you have all of those services. Those people will have to be canned. You got the cafeteria, you got the janitorial, you got the maintenance, and their concern was that if we don't get that tuition to keep them employed, we're going to have to lay off about half our staff, and that creates a problem with unemployment. But even if you open up later on, you can't get those people back that quickly. So
Well, that's right. And as you know, that's all part of the financial model too.
Exactly.
Is all that ancillary revenue that's generated by having the students on campus.
Exactly.
Even part of it is you start to realize that these campuses are surrounded by retail. That retail provides a rental stream, and it all relies on the campus from the students and the faculty and staff funneling into that retail. Well, when they're not there, that whole community starts to collapse, and then you don't have that engine which funnels back into the institution.
And that kills small businesses too. That's where the small businesses, which are the engine for the U.S. economy, it starts to deteriorate. So you're not looking at big corporations. You're looking at small service businesses that'll go out of business, and they can't come back because they don't have the wealth. So it's a spiraling down situation that is not going to get better. It's going to get worse if we don't figure it out.
Yeah, and there are a lot of towns that are really college and university dependent. Even if you take Philadelphia, we call it an ed and med town, but it's very much true. The largest private employer, of course, is the University of Pennsylvania, and beyond that, Philadelphia relies on Penn, Temple, Drexel, St. Joe's, LaSalle, and so on. University of the Sciences. It depends on those institutions largely. Because they were the institutions that couldn't leave the city because they were real estate dependent through the heavy tax years. And if they're not thriving, that's a real challenge for a place like Philadelphia.
And if you bring it back to the church, what happens is that small businesses are hit. Now the people who you serve are now economically stressed, which means it puts more pressure on the church to try to fill in those gaps. So it's a situation that perpetuates itself to a level. I mean, the University of Pennsylvania has a lot of diversity business. Those businesses may go out of business and may not exist in the 21st century, and they don't have the capital or access to capital to come back.
That's interesting. So this is it affects everything. Now, Dr. Harris, in Dallas, we see the numbers are rising. In Texas, I think with Florida, Texas, and Arizona have the highest spikes. What's going on down there on the ground? Something that you can speak to about that.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. A great discussion so far as pertaining to university, because we feel a lot of that here as well. In this particular state, of course, there was a rush to open. And there, of course, as a result, the numbers went up with coronavirus. What we see are some people who are sort of following the president's lead and assuming that there's really no coronavirus. This is all a hoax. So you have people who don't follow the governor's mandate to put on a face covering. And then we have others who are, of course, at the Potter's house, we've had people to die. We had family members. Most recently, two people got it. One worked in the parking lot ministry, and one's in the choir. And the lady in the choir recovered, and her husband died. So, I've been on FaceTime with people in the hospital moaning and groaning, and others, two brothers. One member of our church, his brother is a local pastor in the hospital at the same time. And the brother who's a local pastor passed away. His brother, who goes to Potter's house, recovered. So we have a mixed bag here of some. And I was speaking to a pastor recently who said, I don't know anybody who's had, he has a large church, about 4,000 or 5,000. So I don't know anybody who's had COVID-19. And I frankly don't know anybody who knows anybody who died from it. I just don't get it. And I said, what? It's like the tale of two cities, right? I know a ton of people. I know bishops who died. I have people calling me at 4 o'clock in the morning, panicking because grandma has died. I mean, I don't get what you don't get, and you don't get what. It's this weird division of experience, and it's quite interesting.
Was that a lack of recognition, or just is that out of ignorance or denial?
I have no idea. It is the strangest thing I've ever seen. Then you have churches who are on this, religious liberty, especially not so much here in Dallas because Texas is run by a Republican governor, but in terms of states that have Democratic governors, like California or even Virginia, where there are people who are fighting for religious liberty to go back to church. All the while, I'm getting a call from Florida of a church that decided to go and have their conference in person last week, despite the warnings that this is not a good idea. They did it anyway, and people are in intensive care this week in Florida who were at that conference. They have COVID-19.
Wow.
So at the same time, I know pastors that are going to church and they say nothing is happening. It's the strangest reality.
Sorry, good Bishop.
I think what I've seen historically is that we may be looking for a logical progression of the virus when it is rather random. So there are groups of people who it does not seem to touch, who may be asymptomatic, but the manifestation or the outward manifestation of the virus is going to come. It's a numbers game, but we're looking for almost like a structured spreading, and it doesn't. So you'll see whole groups of people that haven't been touched yet. But if they continue that behavior, the numbers usually play against them.
Yeah.
I know of 26 bishops in New York who died.
Wow.
Because they insisted on having services and having funerals in the traditional way.
Wow.
I know of at least 8 in Detroit that died because they insisted on following tradition and saying it was faith. And initially it looked like they were right, but then the sickness hit them all. Half the people that were at the meeting and all the bishops that were at the meeting. And it was just, it's a season for faith and common sense. And it is not a lack of faith to exercise common sense. It's a numbers game. So yeah, the guy on the other side of Dallas, he may not be touched by it yet, but trust me when I tell you, they will be. If this thing continues, they will be.
Yeah.
Bishop, I'd love to have a conversation with you offline. I want to write an op-ed about this because right now it's becoming a battle of theological ideals. It's a battle between experience, lived reality, and politics, and it's splitting the church. I've requested a meeting with a pastor who's been on the national level talking from the evangelical perspective and making this whole thing about religious freedom. All the while we have people dying. And there seems to be a blatant disregard to Black and brown experience with this illness. And it's been incumbent upon us to speak, because what's happening is there is a certain pressure coming from the evangelical side of things. And I use that word broadly, but I'm speaking specifically to the ones who politicize almost everything. And what's happening is that there is this, it's an oppression. It's a religious oppression. There are people who are torn, pastors who are torn. Should I go? Should I not? If I don't go, am I saying I don't have faith? I was speaking to a young pastor just the other day who he got relief by the rationale that's coming from our bishop. And he said, oh, good. So then I'm doing fine not going, because I really don't think I should go, but I'm feeling the pressure to go anyway. Because they have this theological framework that is warped. The only theological insight they have is sort of an Exodus plagues, go to church, and when you see the blood, you'll pass over, as if that's the only paradigm to deal with an atrocity like this. And so it's a theological.
But is it really theological? Is it more of a cult mentality to control people, as opposed to speaking to the real theology of the Bible? Because if you look at the Bible, it is very clear. If you follow the theology of the Bible from the Old Testament to the New Testament, that God does not speak in terms that would do harm to people just for the sake of doing harm. I think there's, even in ancient times, we can take it from the lepers who were at the gate of Samaria, and they made a choice. They said we could either go into the city or we can go forward. And I think this is where we are in the country. I think it comes down a little bit to a little bit of common sense. If you're in leadership position, sometimes you have to make choices that are based on, and I like what the bishop said, is faith-based, is faith and common sense. You have to have faith, but if you have faith with no common sense, I think it's gonna be your demise. I mean, that's just my view of it. It's sometimes you have to speak up and say no. It's like a father of a household. I had to make decisions about being isolated and quarantined because of my age. I say, hey, look, I'm not 20 years old. I don't know if I am asymptomatic or not, but I'm not foolish enough to go out and risk others' lives just because of my faith and not using common sense.
I think there's something underneath all of this that's unspoken, and since I asked you all to come together, I'll be the one that gets in trouble for this. So no one will be able to say that any of you said this right now. What's underneath all of this, I have some contemporaries that are quote unquote evangelical, and I've known them for all of 30 years. And what is really happening, what most people don't know, is that a lot of my evangelical friends are silent because of the deal they've cut with the administration. And the deal was for silence.
Wow.
If you see something going wrong, I need you guys to be on my side, and I'll give you everything on your laundry list. I'll give you the judges that you want. I'll give you the legislation that you want. And the only way this got out is one or two of their guys defected because he finally got convicted that the deal was anti-Jesus.
Okay.
That it was not concerning people, and that when you hear the silence, it's because of the deal that was cut with the present administration.
Wow.
That's what the silence is all about. So they're not going to say anything against, but they're not going to say anything at all when they don't agree. So their silence is when they don't have a position, and they cut a deal from the beginning. And the only way we found this out is a guy that I know named Shank said, national TV, I got convicted, and this is what happened. We cut a deal for the things that we want: abortion and conservative judges. Wow. And they were saying, if you want this, I have to have your support. You can't come out against me. And they agreed to it.
Yep.
So where the evangelical church normally would rise up about all kinds of things, they're being very silent, which is why you'll understand now that lifestyle issues and all that for this president is not a problem, because some of our religious leaders cut this deal.
Well, he's already said that we're going to have to live with it. I mean, that's ludicrous. I mean, because we've had every opportunity to change, and I think the CDC, the NIH are also in fault because they were opportunities for us. I mean, we had an opportunity in the U.S. to take the COVID test from the World Health Organization, and we refused it.
Yeah,
we decided to develop our own test, and the test that we developed at the CDC failed. So we were already behind the 8 ball by the time we got into March because nobody was being tested. And so on that basis, they've made a bad deal. They made a big deal with the devil. Let me just explain about it. It's a deal with the devil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Bishop, because we were going to start moving into why have we politicized COVID. So wearing a mask now is political rather than just being a common courtesy. This merging of faith and Americana, to me, is dangerous. And it's driving a movement. Well, it's been driving the movement since America began.
Yeah.
But we continue to see using faith to get American principles established. And maybe we can kind of, if y'all want to dive into that deep end, maybe we can go there if you guys want to.
Dr. Twiggs.
That's a big problem. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Twiggs. I can see it burling up in your forehead.
Welcome back.
I can see it all over your forehead.
Can you all hear me now? I've worked
Yes.
feverishly to get back into
Yes.
your
Yes.
presence.
Welcome back.
And the thing that, thank you so much. I'm listening to all of what is going on, whether it be political, whether it be faith-based, and what I'm feeling in my spirit has to do with the second word that you assigned to this particular discussion, which is pandemonium. And the reason that I bring it up now is because of the meaning of it. Okay, it it speaks to confusion, to noisiness, to discord, to disorder, but it's based in demonic activity. It stems from the very Greek root of all demons, pandemonium, all evil spirits. And so when you start talking about what's going on in the nation as it relates to the disease and as it relates to dealing with the disease, and even as you said, Bishop, the root of the deals that have been taking place behind the scenes, not just now, but in many, many years gone by, the demonic oppression, the demonic activity that has been unleashed on the earth in this moment because of the times that we're living in, because of the end times that we're living in, because of the soon return of the Savior, that we're dealing with not flesh and blood. We're dealing with principalities and spirits. And right now, I don't see the church dealing with that. I see us responding and reacting to and becoming involved in a conversation that is on this level, as opposed to directing our hearts and our minds to speak to the power that is above all these powers and get back to the basics of what the church has as it at its disposal, not even dealing with the evangelical craziness, but dealing with the disorders in the heavens as it relates to what's going on in the earth. We don't have a praying church right now. What we have is a reactive church. We have a reactive leadership that's reacting to the symptoms of what's going on, the disease, the spreading of the disease, the injustices. All of that is rooted in sin. All of that is rooted in the literal diabolical attack that the adversary has unleashed on the earth now. And unless we take the spiritual weapons that we have and start targeting the root of the problem, start getting back to what Joel told us to do, which is to go face down in prayer, call prayer movements, call prayer meetings that will not let up, like the old folk, that just will not quit until we start to see a turnaround in the heavens. And we're not going to, we can become involved in the rhetoric, we can become involved in all kinds of conversations, but until we take our rightful place in the heavens, nothing is going to move down here in the earth. We're just going to see a play out of what we've been seeing played out over centuries. And now when God gives us an opportunity as the church to rise up and take the literal authority that we have in the heavens, I see us becoming ingrained in the conversation that's being driven by the powers that are here on earth. And for us to drive the conversation, we're going to have to drive it from the top down. And I don't mean Trump. I mean above him, above all of the powers that we see active in the earth today. So it's okay. I understand discussing it all. But when you get right down to it, what are we going to do? What are we going to do about it as the church that has the power and the authority to make changes in the earth from heaven down? That's just something that's in my spirit, and I just can't let it go.
Well, I wish you had been able to be with us on the first conversation, because one of the things that we discussed, and something I've been extremely adamant about since about February, is that as I listened to 12 prophets, I got 12 interpretations as to what God is doing. And in a nutshell, what I have declared and been repeating is that what God wants is his obviously bloodstained church back. The one with the authority, the one with the power, the one with the ability, that in the context we're in right now, it is a plague and there is a solution, But what God wants is that we have diluted our brand to such an extent that God had to give the angel a signal in order for him to know the difference between Egyptians and Israelites. So what that talks to me about is the fact that the church, which is a faith, has slipped into the reason of the culture. That dilutes our brand. And the message to the church is that he wants his church back and wants us to choose him again and wants us to be that obviously bloodstained, powerful, heaven-moving church that we've always been. At the same time, he also wants us to take our place as the entity that speaks truth to power. So there's a spiritual and a cultural battle that has to be won, and we got to fight them at the same time. So we've got to, I'm back to faith and wisdom, or faith and common sense again. We're in a situation where, yes, I have a son, a pastor, who was very sick with COVID. And he described his time in the hospital not as just an attack on his body. He said it was the darkest spiritual place he'd ever been in. This is what he told me. It's the darkest spiritual place he's ever been in. He said, I was in a dark place that I wasn't sure I was coming back from. This is a strong man of God that I know. So this thing that told me, I knew it already. This thing is not just spiritual, it's physical. It's not just physical, it's spiritual. There are dual dimensions at work, and we've got to attack both of them. The disease on the ground and the disturbance in the atmosphere.
Yeah, but I think the disease is actually pointing out the hypocrisy of the church.
Absolutely.
And I believe that I agree with Dr. Twiggs, but I also believe that the church has been a hypocrite and the church has been divided. So I think when he has attacked us on the social and political side, the church has not been strong enough and unified enough to stand up and say, this is the direction this country should go. So as we have a divided church. We've had a divided church in this country for years.
Our brand is diluted.
Yes.
Our brand is diluted.
Go ahead,
Greg.
Right. So there was a question earlier in terms of why has masking become politicized? And I think that actually ties, there are a couple concepts that are flowing around, and I think that there's a thread that comes that ties them together. We were talking about sin a little earlier, we're talking about conflicts in the church. I think that what's going on, and we see this in a broad spectrum right now, is, sin to me often means separation. It's separation from God, it's separation from one another. And we're seeing this fragmentation in our society as a whole, as we're seeing this unrest, pandemonium, this unrest in our cities, as we're seeing this increase in crime, which is at many levels a result of sin. And at a core where we're seeing this tension with our elected leaders, or we're seeing this politicization of the mask and what the intentions are, we're seeing a breakdown in the social contract. And what I mean by that is that what the role of government ultimately is, the American experiment is one, flawed as it is, but it's one that's rooted in the belief that the individual is ultimately the sovereign, that we are free individuals, and we give up this liberty and freedom to a collective government that is there to protect us and is there to serve us. But we're giving that up to something that we are to trust and believe in. And in too many broad ways, that social contract's being broken. And where it's getting politicized is because it can be politicized, because too many people don't believe that their government is fair and honest and true. And the unrest is coming because we haven't gotten into the issues of other issues, but again, it's because the social contract's broken in the minds of too many people at too many levels. And that's where we're seeing a fundamental breakdown. Now, I think we know at the local, state, federal level, we've seen the complete collapse in the leadership class at the governmental level. And I think what I'm hearing from all of you as church leaders is saying now is a time more than ever that we need wisdom from the community of faith, because we're not getting wisdom from other leadership leaders. And we're not getting it from the community of faith as well. And that is leading to this broad-based pandemonium that we're seeing. That at this critical juncture where from our elected officials and from our governmental leaders and from our corporate leaders, we're having a vacuum of leadership. We in particular need the community of faith to step into this vacuum and provide light in the darkness. And we're not getting that light at this time.
Because they've cut a deal.
Because they have maybe cut a deal with the darkness.
Yep.
And so all we have is darkness. But
Yeah,
we can't.
Bishop Evans, if I can chime in.
Sure.
I think part of our challenge is, well, first of all, the gift of the African diasporas. We came from a continent that didn't see the separation between spirituality and everyday life. And I think so in a way, we bring a gift of not disconnecting those two. But when we came to in this country, it's set up as church and state separated. So we've been forced into this bifurcation between spirituality on the one hand and getting involved with political life on the other hand. But I think this generation has returned to this sort of organic spirituality where you talked about your family member who's in New York saying, you know, my phone died, but I'm not giving up, because they don't see a separation between spirituality and the fight. I think that part of what the church might consider, and church broadly, is that we cannot allow this notion of spirituality and seeking God and prayer to be separated from speaking up for those who cannot speak up for themselves, being prophetic, speaking truth to power, being involved with the transformation process. Because what happens, and I think that Archbishop Desmond Tutu said this, he said, they brought us their religion and they took our gold. And we were left with the church while they took our whole country. So there's this sense in which if we only think about prayer and separation from attending to finances and economy and school systems and policing and criminal justice systems and so forth, what will happen is we lose what it takes to actually realize the spiritual life in the everyday life.
If I can say something real quick, because we got about 13 minutes left before we got to go, unless, we just keep going. I think what I'm hearing from everyone, and this will help lead into a discussion, is I think we're interpreting love God and love your neighbor differently. Jesus says the two great commandments, you want to reduce the whole Bible down to two things: love God, love your neighbor. So to me, the mass, the social injustice of violence against minorities and those things, we want to think that we love God, but not properly love our neighbor. And that whole buyout thing Bishop talked about, of that complicity, to me, that's trying to justify, I'm with God, I'm on his side because I'm against abortion, we need these pro-life judges and etc. But to heck with everybody else that's alive. I hope it's the concept that I'm bringing up is making sense, because to me, you can't be pro-life. Some people are just pro-birth. They're not really pro-life, if I can say that.
Just one quick statement. I know we come into the end. I think that politics and the church they merged and they have now clashed.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be separation of church and politics of these. And I think the two have come together. Now you have a Siamese twin, and we're having a hard time trying to separate the two. It's just, how do you separate what is civil, what are the civil rights, and what are the things that the church demands of us? And that's why when we get into these social issues, we're so connected, or the church has been so connected through politics. It's hard to separate the two. If you separate one from the other, you kill the twins. They're connected at the head. So when Trump comes in, his whole idea was to bring that conservative church more under the control of the Republican Party. And now that you're there, how do you separate yourself from the Word of God and from the politics that it is antithetical to the Word of God? And the church can't come together because the church really doesn't know what it is. are we a political entity, or are we a faith-based organization that follows the word of God?
Well, we're both, though. We're not party politics, but Jesus has his own politics. And
well,
so that's,
but Jesus used politics in a way to further the word of God. He didn't use politics to further his wealth, or to further his influence. I mean, he was totally antithetical to everything that the Pharisees were about. He said, it was told in the past that you did it this way, but that was not really what the word of the God said. And we're interpreting. I mean, when we come down to the politics of it, and I don't want to speak politically, but when I look at the Republican Party, they base their whole religious ideology on 2 points: abortion. What about abortion? Abortion, in the womb. What about abortion out of the womb? They don't see that. They see it totally differently, and as a result of that, it's difficult to talk about the murder of a feces of this, and at the same time, do not support social programs that would help people move forward and be progressive.
So, I mean, I'm surrounded by clergy here, so I don't want to step out of my, I don't want to step out of my lane, but I believe Jesus didn't really get political until he came into Judea, and he didn't really get enraged until he was in Judea and he saw the people exploited by the political class in Judea. Of course, the great examples of turning over the table, in the temples and times like that, and the sort of exploitation of the people. And, is this not a time where we see the people being exploited, is this not a time that feels like the people being exploited in Judea, in effect?
Yeah, I think there's a fundamental mistake being made by let's say Christian people at large, and you all correct me if you think I'm wrong. I think we are in danger of being trapped by the tyranny of the word "or," this or that. And when I say that, some of us believe that this is a great time for prayer, and that is absolutely correct. Some of us believe this is a great time for action, and that's absolutely correct. The right formula is not this or that. The right formula is this and that, because I believe the miracle is in the and. It's in the and. So we move heaven while we're moving on earth. That has to happen on 2 fronts. One of the traps is, we can't let Jesus handle it when he's put us here to handle it. So yes, we've got to move heaven, but that does not preclude us from being very active and productive on earth. So both of these, this and that, is what is going to make this thing happen for real, because we can get the affirmation in heaven, but the book tells me what I'm going to bind on earth, we're going to have to participate in binding bind in heaven. I'm going to participate in binding on earth. So it is a 2-pronged approach. We've got to consecrate and execute at the same time. And if we don't do that, we'll absolutely hear God, but he won't be able to use us to move things on earth, because he's not doing it without our participation down here. We're the way he gets things done on earth.
So, Bishop, I think there's a question, which is that process of discernment. And someone earlier said, in chaos, there's opportunity. And I think that's right.
Yes.
And I think one of the questions for a lot of people now is how to take this chaos and turn it into opportunity. How to take this moment in time where there clearly is opportunity, but to make sure something positive and productive comes out of this.
Exactly.
And what doesn't happen too often is that something that could become positive and productive either ends up being the same old, or turns into something which is tragic and ends up being actually unproductive or negative at the end of it.
Yep.
And so where's that process of discernment that leads to the proper pathway so that people can, is that through prayer, or where does a community figure out what is the right path to move forward and find unity in a way to do that?
It's both through prayer and action.
But salvation didn't come to us from the heavens. It came to us by the birth of Jesus Christ.
Right.
So that's heaven sending that's where the action is. The action was through Jesus Christ. The prayer was when they prayed for the Messiah.
Okay. Rita?
Oh, thank you. I'm wrestling with principalities here on this equipment. And,
You got pandemonium right there.
and I refuse to let him win. I was struck by something in my spirit, and I gotta say it. To let the church be the church, to actually allow the church to go back to its fundamental reason for being here, requires that we be filled with the Holy Ghost, so that we are not dealing with necessarily the wisdom of men in our leadership, pastors particularly, and then allow the people of God to be educated concerning what is going on. Don't hide or hoard anything from them in terms of information, to make sure that they are aware of what their godly responsibility is, as well as their community responsibility. Because what we do is, here in Newport News, we pray and we protest. We march as well as pray. And while we are praying, while we are loving in the midst of protesting and walking with our brothers and sisters that don't know Jesus, we are being given opportunity to witness to them. And then they're able to see our faith in action as well. And then we tell them the next level is for you to not only vote, not only protest, but to vote. And we are willing to help them do that. So the activity of the church, absolutely, Bishop, has to be boots on the ground, as well as prayers going up to heaven. But you cannot let the church lose its identity in the earth. We are not of this world.
I agree.
And so that's something that's in my spirit, and I'm speaking it wherever I go, to the police chief, to the mayor, to the city council. And we have to be involved, because we are the apostolic voice that God has in the earth in this hour. And he's counting on us to represent him in every way possible.
I think, like I said earlier, he wants his obviously bloodstained church back.
Yes.
He wants it back.
Yes.
How much time do we have left, Pastor Nick?
About 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes.
Okay. Just so for our young people that are matriculating out of high school into college, Greg, what are the encouraging signs? And Antipas, you're the president of the college down there. What are your positive signs, or some words that might encourage our students that their future has not been disrupted irrevocably? That what is it going to take for, because everybody can't go to Harvard and Drexel and Yale. What happens for those that, because Greg and I shared a board at Lincoln University. What happens about HBCUs and universities at that level?
Well, I would just say that when I had the privilege of being on the board of Lincoln, there was no greater board chair than the bishop. But what I would say is
we got some work done.
we got some work done.
Yeah.
What I would say is, like, look, we did have a very strong economy and low unemployment coming into this situation, which was positive, and we have a lot of ability to recover coming out of it. We do have really good prospects at a vaccine coming. Hopefully they will move. I know there's one being worked on out of the University of Pennsylvania with Wistar Institute that's going into its phase 2 trials. At 6 weeks, it had a 96% efficacy rate with no negative side effects. So that's going into the next round of trials. If they can get that thing through the trials and into production, I mean, we really should see a vaccine coming out. Whether that's by the new year, I'm not sure. But a vaccine is in sight, and we have to ride through this. But from now until then, particularly from young people, we need them to be cautious so that people who are high risk don't die. They need to think about their grandparents, their parents, people who are at risk and have other conditions, and really just be sensitive. And there are some young people who are at risk too, but they just need to think in love and faith and consideration for others who can die based on their behavior. So when they're going out in groups and thinking about what they want to do, they really have to just be a little bit considerate to others who they're putting at risk. But the future will be there. Our economy will recover. Everything will go back to normal. We will get there. We will have a vaccine within a year. We will get through this.
Yeah. Antipas?
Yeah, I think that young people need to be sure to be careful and take all the precautions, because we don't want to bomb rush ourselves to success and then end up in failure with this COVID-19. I think part of the beauty of the moment, if we can find beauty in pandemonium, right, is that young people, all of us, have an opportunity to be creative and innovative and embrace change and be able to pivot and to adjust to the moment. The future is in many ways in our hands. And if we are believers, we believe that God has chosen us for such a time as this. So the future of higher education cannot just return to what it was. Artificial intelligence is an opportunity for us to really lean into the future, because we know in the next 20 years already, before COVID, that there were going to be some jobs that were going to disappear because of artificial intelligence. So this is a creative moment for young people not to just bemoan the fact that it's not what we expected, but to embrace the moment as an opportunity for creative ideas that will, I hope, equip us and future generations to bear witness in the public square. And in this case, public square could be in technological space. So I think that is an opportunity. The other thing is I hope that we just don't go back to where we were. And I hope that young people who are going to college would see this as an opportunity to be innovative and creative and lead. So we're not just becoming educated to participate, we're becoming educated and filled with the spirit to penetrate a society that is desperately in need of transformation.
Thank you, Antipas. Dr. Twiggs, you had your finger up?
Just one last thing. I was piggybacking on what he's saying, and that is the major universities, many of them are offering free classes that perhaps our young people should be directed to, so that they can actually take advantage of online education and not necessarily depend on going back to the original mode. And I do think people places like Princeton and Harvard are being proactive in providing opportunities for everybody, and not just our young people, but certainly our young people should be taking advantage of this time online to get their education, as much of it as they can, from a wealth transfer perspective. That is to say, if it's free, take it.
Thank you, Dr. Twiggs. Dr. Sanders, any closing remarks?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's going to be about economics and faith. I don't believe that for the community of color, diversity is very important. But if we don't have the economics, we're going to be in a desperate situation. And it's not just education. It's actually building your own businesses, taking advantage of these opportunities that are affording you right now. I think that we don't spend a lot of money in the African American community. We spend it outside, but I've been in business for 20 years, and we started with low of nothing, and we're a global player. We do business around the world, and I don't believe that we have to have a bigger vision. We have to have economics, because in the economical environment that we're in now, the times when I couldn't come to the table and sit at the table with these big corporations to seek their businesses, I didn't have the financial backing. I now have it. I have the money. I can demand things from them that I couldn't demand before. And if we don't get into I'm talking about the church as well, and the Black church in particular, if we don't have if the economy and the economics is not in our favor, we're going to be always at the mercy of the government. I think it adversely affects us with COVID-19 is because of economics. We're in the worst communities. We can't practice social separation because we live in households where you got 15 and 20 people living. We can't we don't have access to capital. Communities are having problems with that social unrest. We really going to have to start thinking more economically, but we have to also think about faith and prayer and doing it in a nonviolent way. If we don't do that, the next pandemic is going to be just as worse. Just as bad or worse. It's about economics, and it's about faith in God.
That's Nick.
My hope is that for the young people, that they will see that their passion is important to protest, to do all those things, but more importantly, to get out and vote. We saw in the civil rights movement, you saw the older generation with the certain movements that they had that, but a lot of the major movements of the Woolworths counter-sitting and all those things were coming from the young people. The young people were out there getting the hoses, and a lot of, not saying the older folks weren't, but a lot of that movement was from the younger crowd. And we saw, if you study the civil rights movement, there were issues between the older crowd, the way they did it, and the younger crowd, the way they fought it. But you needed both to get it done. You needed somebody that can talk in the White House and somebody that can be on the streets. And we need both. And it doesn't mean one is selling out. We need both, but we need our young people to understand you can do all this marching, you can do all this stuff, which I'm all for. Pray, march. But when it comes down to it, if you want to make change, votes and money, talk with your money, talk with your votes. And that's how real change will happen if we can all do it together.
Thank all of you for your coming today. I'm just so excited. This collection of experience and brain power was just amazing to me. To Dr. Wynn, my friend for a long time, Greg, my friend for a long time, Antipas, my friend for a long time, Rita, my friend for a long time. Is that why they call me a general now? Okay, so just so happy you all took the time to join us today. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
We will broadcast on the 23rd at 7 p.m. Pastor Nick has his finger up. What is it, Pastor Nick?
One last thing, Bishop, your anniversary this month, 30 years.
Oh yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, wow. Congratulations to you.
Yeah. Thank you.
On the 26th, this coming Sunday, at our morning service, Prophet Daniel Amatang will be with us in the morning. We're going to air the sermon from Bishop Jakes from 2011 at 6 p.m. All right. So you guys make sure that you join us. It's going to be great. Sow into his life. Get all the stuff. He's doing all this work. So that's all.
He does. Well deserved.
Yeah.